When my wife gave me 9 days to prove I was worth keeping, I didn't panic. I took a deep breath and started evaluating if she was worth keeping too. Hey folks, thanks for stopping by again. I've got a new chapter of my story to lay out for you today. So here goes. The air in the conference room felt unusually thick that afternoon, like it was pressing down on me. Just then my phone buzzed on the table. A message from Emily. Just 10 words, but they hit like a gut punch. 9 days to show me why you're worth keeping. Starting now. I barely mumbled an excuse to the client across from me, already gripping my phone a little too tightly. When I scrolled down, the rest of her message laid out a harsh list of everything she thought I was doing wrong. She said I cared more about work than her, that I wasn't romantic anymore, that I didn't lift my weight around the house. Paragraph after paragraph, all pointing fingers. And then came her solution, an evaluation period. Like I was some underperforming employee on thin ice. Like our marriage had turned into a corporate job I never even signed up for. Honestly, my first reaction wasn't pain or confusion. It was this strange, cold awe. The sheer nerve of it caught me off guard. I imagine most guys in my shoes would have panicked. Maybe scrambled to buy flowers, sent back some desperate apology. But me? Sitting there in that brightly lit office hallway, her words still fresh on the screen, I felt something shift inside me. If she was giving me 9 days to prove I deserved to stay in this marriage, then I figured I had 9 days to decide if she was still someone I wanted to be with. I typed back without hesitation, funny timing. I was just thinking the same about you. Let's both evaluate. I slipped the phone into my pocket, stood up straighter, and walked back into that meeting with a different energy. My coworkers noticed the change immediately. There was a sharpness in me now, a focus they hadn't seen in a while. When the client tried to cut us down on price, I held the line. I didn't flinch, didn't fold. I laid out our terms and left it at that. Later that evening, I came home to find Emily standing in the living room. Arms folded, jaw set tight. She was clearly bracing for a version of me that wasn't the one who walked through the door. We need to talk, she snapped, her voice sharp. About that text you sent. I loosened my tie and gave a small shrug. Sure. Though I gotta say, your way of bringing this up was original. Most people save these kinds of talks for face-to-face. She blinked, caught off guard. I don't think she expected me to keep my cool, let alone throw sarcasm into the mix. This isn't a joke, Jason, she said, her tone suddenly more serious. I meant what I said. I'm evaluating our marriage. So am I, Emily, I replied, looking her straight in the eye. Truth is, I'd already started my side of the evaluation. Day one was proving to be unexpectedly revealing. Emily's eyebrows knitted together. What's that supposed to mean? I sat down across from her, keeping my eyes on hers, steady and calm. It means, I said slowly, that any woman who thinks sending her husband a performance review by text message is an acceptable way to handle things, well, she might want to take a long, hard look at how she's been showing up as a wife. Her mouth opened slightly, caught off guard. This wasn't going how she pictured it. She had expected me to play the part of the chastised husband. But I wasn't reading from that script. You think you can just turn this around on me? She asked, voice tightening. I'm not turning anything around, I replied firmly. You're the one who decided we're in evaluation mode. I'm just treating it like a two-way street. She shot up from the couch, arms stiff at her sides. I actually gave you specific things to work on, real issues in this marriage. And I'm sure we'll talk through those, I said, nodding calmly. But let's start with this. Sending ultimatums by text instead of sitting down like adults and having a real conversation? That's a red flag. And treating your husband like a staff member on probation? That says more about your mindset than mine. I was just trying to make a point, she snapped. You did, I said, my voice quieter. Just not the one you were aiming for. She stared at me for a moment, silent, still. I could see it hitting her, that this wasn't going to go the way she'd hoped. The control she thought she had? Slipping fast. So what now? She asked, her tone sharper, more defensive. You're just not going to try? You're not even going to work on anything I brought up? Oh, I'll be working on things, I said, standing and walking toward the kitchen. Just might not be the same list you had in mind. I opened the fridge, grabbed a cold beer, turned back to her. So, what's for dinner? Or is cooking one of the things I apparently never do enough of? I ordered pizza, she said, a little quieter now. Perfect, I murmured, twisting the cap off my drink. Day 1, evaluation notes. Wife orders takeout, complains about husband not managing the house. Husband picks up slack at work, holds boundaries. Should be an enlightening week. She followed me slowly, something different in her step. Her confidence had taken a hit. You're acting different, she said, her voice uncertain. I looked over at her and nodded. You gave me 9 days to decide if you were worth holding on to, Emily? I took a slow sip of the beer, eyes locked on hers. I'm thinking it over, I said. But the real question is, what are you planning to do with your 9 days to show me you're worth staying for? The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. You could feel it in the room. She'd started this whole thing thinking she had the upper hand, like she was holding all the cards. But now, she was beginning to see that maybe she dealt herself a bad hand from the start. This wasn't how I pictured it going, Emily mumbled, voice barely above a whisper. No, I bet it wasn't, I said calmly. You probably thought I'd come home a wreck. Maybe fall to my knees, apologize, offer to fix everything, buy you some shiny distraction. I gave a small shrug. But see, that's the trouble with ultimatums. They cut both ways. You don't get to demand respect while handing out disrespect. Right then the doorbell rang. A bit of mercy, honestly. The pizza had arrived. Is communication still limited to text messages? I asked as I stood up, or are we leveling up to emails now? She gave a soft, bitter laugh and sat down across from me at the table. But that confident edge she'd had earlier in the day? Gone. She looked unsure, like the ground under her feet had started to shift. I was trying to save our marriage, she said, her voice suddenly defensive. By threatening to walk away from it? I asked, biting into a slice of pizza. That's a unique approach, I'll give you that. I took another bite, then added, but don't worry, I'm treating this evaluation period seriously. Real seriously. Looks like we both are now. Day 2, reclaiming space. The next morning didn't start the way it usually did. Most days I'd check in with Emily, ask if she needed anything, maybe cook her breakfast before heading out. But this time I just got up and went to the gym. No fuss. No checking in. Halfway through my workout, an old friend texted, "Drinks Friday?" "Always," I replied. They followed up, "Everything good?" I smiled a little to myself. Better than good. I'm remembering the man I used to be. When I came home that evening, Emily was already waiting, same stern look she wore the day before. Apparently we were due for another round of feedback. You left early this morning. Didn't even say goodbye, she said, almost accusing. I hung up my jacket and turned toward her. I went to the gym, I said casually. You were still asleep. Is there a standard goodbye procedure in your evaluation handbook I missed? She crossed her arms. You don't go to the gym. Not since we got married. I used to go every day, I said, heading into the kitchen. Before everything became about adjusting to your preferences. I pulled out the chicken I'd prepped earlier and got to work. You know, I added over my shoulder, I used to ask what you wanted for dinner every night. But tonight, I cooked what I felt like eating. I tossed the chicken into the skillet, the sizzle filling the room. Seasoned it how I like to. Day 2 observations, Emily. I had honestly forgotten how good it felt to make choices just for myself. No compromises, no second guessing. As I moved around the kitchen, Emily stayed seated at the island, quietly watching me prepare dinner. So you're really planning to keep this up all week? She asked, her voice unsure. Keep what up? I said, glancing at her. Living my life? I dipped the chicken into the breadcrumbs and placed it into the pan, the sizzle answering for me. You gave me 9 days to prove I'm worth keeping. I'm using them to remember who I was before I started asking permission to be myself. I paused and looked up from the stove. Do you have plans tonight? I asked. She hesitated. No. But, you usually check with me first. And you usually had something lined up that meant I had to cancel mine? I said, matter of fact. A headache. A dinner with your parents. Some urgent thing that turned out to be nothing. I flipped the chicken and turned back to her. Day 2 revelation, Emily, I've got friends who still enjoy being around me. Who invite me out without making it feel like I'm asking for trouble. Wild, right? Her eyes narrowed just slightly, like she was studying a part of me she hadn't seen in a while. Then, almost quietly, she said, I wasn't trying to push you away. I was trying to fix things. I thought if I made it clear what I needed, if I threatened to leave, you'd finally pay attention. Lately, you felt so far away. I set my fork down and leaned in a little. I felt distant because every time we talk, it turns into a list of what I'm not doing right. Every idea I bring up gets torn apart. Every plan I try to make ends up reshaped to fit your version of how things should be. That's not fair, she said quickly. Last month. I cut in gently but firmly. Last month you told me we needed to be partners. Support each other. But there's a difference between support and performance. I'm not here to dance for applause or manage your moods like some emotional caretaker. I finished eating, stood up, and brought my plate to the sink. Day 2 takeaway? I said over my shoulder. I'd forgotten how freeing it is to have my own thoughts and stand by them. She stayed at the table, silent, processing everything as I washed the dishes. I dried my hands and turned back to her. There are 7 days left in this little trial period you set, I said, my voice calm but direct. So here's a piece of feedback, free of charge. I paused, just long enough for the words to land. Threatening to leave someone? It only works if they're still afraid to lose you. This feels like punishment, Emily said from across the room. No, I replied, not even glancing up from what I was doing. Punishment would have been if I gave you a 9-day ultimatum. This is just me remembering I'm a whole person. Even in a marriage, I'm allowed to exist as myself. She stood there a moment longer, probably waiting for me to soften or walk it back. When I didn't, she turned and headed to the couch. A moment later, I heard the television turn on, but the volume was way lower than usual. Day 2 was already working. She was beginning to realize that this little test she'd created hadn't just put me on trial. It had unintentionally given me a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. Day 3, shifting dynamics. The next morning, I came into the kitchen and smelled breakfast cooking. Real breakfast, not just something tossed into a toaster. Well, look at that, I said. Day 3 of the evaluation period and suddenly you're Martha Stewart? I always make breakfast, she replied a little too quickly. You heat up frozen waffles, Emily, I said, taking a sip of my coffee. This is actual cooking. She paused at the stove. What's the occasion? I asked, genuinely curious. Can't I do something nice for my husband? She asked, trying to keep it light. Of course you can, I said, setting down my mug. The question is, why now? Why the sudden change of heart? Especially after sending me that lovely text outlining all the ways I've apparently fallen short. She flipped the bacon a bit too forcefully. I was hoping we could talk about your behavior yesterday. My behavior? I asked, raising an eyebrow. What exactly does that mean? It means, she said, you were distant, dismissive, not like yourself. No, Emily, I said calmly but firmly. It means that for the first time in a long time, I'm looking at our relationship with clear eyes. Not trying to keep you from being upset. Not walking on eggshells to keep the peace. Just seeing it for what it is. She turned to face me. And what are you seeing? I finished chewing, then met her eyes. I'm seeing that I've spent so much time managing your moods and trying not to set you off, that I never stopped to ask if this marriage actually makes me happy. Her face tensed. So what, you're saying I make you miserable? I'm saying, I replied carefully, you wear me down. I'm constantly bracing for the next complaint, the next issue, the next criticism. And it's draining. I stood up and walked to the sink. I need someone who can disagree with me without making it feel like an attack. Someone who wants to build solutions with me, not just list all the ways I'm coming up short. I do contribute, Emily said, her voice rising. What about now? Yesterday you accused me of not helping around the house, while you stood there watching me clean up the kitchen after I cooked dinner. I looked over at her, calm but firm. And this morning you're suddenly making breakfast for the first time in how long? Let's not kid ourselves, Emily. You didn't do this because you missed me or because it brings you joy. You did it because your ultimatum backfired and you're scrambling. She stood up from her stool abruptly, her chair screeching against the tile. So what, now nothing I do is good enough? I set my coffee down slowly. Now you know how I felt for the last few years. She stared at me, stunned into silence. I'm not asking for perfection, I continued, just a space where I'm appreciated for what I do bring to the table, instead of constantly being reminded of where I fall short. A place where I don't have to keep explaining myself or feel like I'm being graded. I grabbed my keys from the counter and headed toward the front door. Emily followed quickly behind. We're not done with this conversation, she said, her voice tense. We are, for now, I replied, not turning around. I've still got 7 days to figure out whether I want to spend the rest of my life having this same argument. You can't just walk out every time we disagree. I turned, finally facing her. Watch me, I said quietly. That's the one gift your 9-day evaluation gave me, the reminder that I don't have to stay out of fear. Especially fear of being left, because I'm already halfway gone. And with that, I walked out the door, leaving her there in the doorway, caught in the weight of what I just said. At work that day something felt lighter. For the first time in months, maybe longer, my head was clear. I was focused. Even my assistant noticed it. You're sharper than usual today, she said, smiling. Did something change? Yeah, I said simply. I think I started waking up again. At lunch, I called up an old buddy, David. We hadn't talked in over a year. The conversation was easy, warm, like no time had passed. And it hit me, this pattern I'd been stuck in for years was finally coming into focus. I had trimmed my life down so carefully, so completely, removing anything that didn't get Emily's seal of approval, and all I had left was her opinion of me. Nothing else. Day 4, the knife twist. That evening, I walked through the front door to find Emily sitting on the couch, some generic romantic comedy playing in the background. "I picked something light," she said. "You seem tense lately." I didn't respond, just nodded and sat down across from her. "Remember last month?" she said. "We went shopping? Ended up doing something you always complain about." "Yeah," I said. "Because that's what we always do." "You shut down every suggestion I made that day until there was only one thing left, your plan." "I was trying to find something we could both enjoy," she argued. "No, Emily," I said, shaking my head. "You weren't compromising. You were eliminating. That's not teamwork. That's control. You cornered me until the only choice left was yours." Her mouth opened, but she hesitated. "I can't believe you're calling me manipulative. You sent your husband a performance review through a text message and expected him to break down in guilt and run after you. What would you call that?" She didn't answer. Just sat there still. Quiet. Finally, the silence settled in. "I was scared you were losing interest," Emily said quietly, her wine glass halfway to her lips. Her voice was soft, almost unsure. I stood up slowly. "That wasn't the reaction you were expecting, was it?" She blinked, caught off guard again. 6 days left, I said, heading toward the hallway. "Make them count." Day 4, the revelation. Later that afternoon, I was having lunch with my old friend Chris. We hadn't met up in a while and we'd been talking about work, sports, life, light stuff. But then, out of nowhere, he hit me with something that brought the whole conversation to a halt. "Man," he said with a grin, "it's good to see you acting like yourself again. For a while there it felt like Emily had you totally, I don't know, under control." "What do you mean?" I asked. Fork paused midair. Chris immediately looked uncomfortable. "Forget I said anything," he muttered, taking a sip of his drink. "No, I'm serious," I pressed. "Say it. I want to know." He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, it's not my place. But there was that time we invited you to that poker night and she said you couldn't come because she already made plans with her family. Same weekend. Didn't even ask you first. You seemed off after that." I felt a cold weight settle in my chest. "What else?" Chris looked like he really didn't want to answer. "Mark, are you sure you want to know?" "I wouldn't be asking if I didn't." "Tell me." He let out a slow breath and leaned back in his chair. "Lisa's wife goes to the same salon as Emily. She overheard her last month, saying some stuff about you. Stuff that stuck with me." I went still. The background noise of the restaurant seemed to fade into a dull hum. "What kind of stuff?" "She said you don't do anything romantic anymore. That you're boring in bed. That she's not even sure why she married you. Just venting maybe. But still." The room blurred around me for a second. "She actually said that?" "That's what Lisa's wife told me," Chris said quietly. And not in a joking way. She sounded frustrated. Like you being emotionally steady was somehow a flaw. My mouth felt dry. "Why didn't anyone tell me sooner?" He gave me a look full of sympathy. "What were we supposed to say? Hey, your wife's trashing you to strangers? We figured either you knew and were okay with it, or you'd see it for yourself eventually." I pushed the food around my plate, suddenly nauseous. "She hasn't been supporting me," I muttered. "She's been undermining me." Chris raised his hands gently. "Maybe not on purpose. Maybe she's just been venting to the wrong people instead of coming to you. But it doesn't sound like support either." I nodded slowly, a knot tightening in my chest. That evening when I got home, Emily was already there, curled up on the couch with her phone. She looked up when I walked in. "Oh," she said casually. "The girls from the salon were talking about planning a weekend trip soon." "The girls from the salon?" I asked, watching her carefully. She gave a quick smile, but I caught the flicker of hesitation. "Yeah, among others. A few of us were tossing around the idea." I walked into the kitchen and grabbed a glass of water. "Huh," I said casually. "Just curious, what kind of stuff do you all talk about on those visits? Sounds like there's never a dull moment." Her smile faltered. "I mean," I added, looking at her directly, "you seem to have plenty to say when I'm not around." "Just the usual stuff," Emily replied, her voice a bit too casual. "Work life, you know." I nodded slowly. "Right. Normal stuff." I turned and headed upstairs to change, leaving her standing there in the kitchen, eyebrows drawn together like she wasn't sure if something had just shifted, or if she imagined it. When I came back down, she was setting the table. Takeout boxes were stacked neatly on the counter. "I picked up Chinese," she said. "Your favorite." I gave her a quiet look as I sat down. "Is it really my favorite? Or just the version of me that fits into your carefully curated view of our marriage?" Her forehead creased. "I don't understand." I set down my chopsticks and met her eyes directly, not flinching. "Do you remember Lisa's wife? From the Hendersons' Christmas party?" Her face went pale. Not a flicker of confusion, just instant recognition. "What about her?" she asked, voice tight. "Interesting woman," I said calmly. "Apparently she has a sharp memory. And even sharper hearing." The silence between us grew heavy. Tets. She knew exactly where I was going. "I don't know what you think you heard," she said quietly. I shook my head. "I didn't hear anything, Emily. But Lisa's wife did. Enough to paint a very detailed picture of how romantic I'm not. Of how boring I apparently am. And of how confused you are about why you ever married me in the first place." She stood up abruptly, pushing her chair back. "It wasn't like that." "Then tell me," I said, my voice even. "Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds a lot like you've been building this narrative of the neglected, misunderstood wife, while simultaneously criticizing me for not trying hard enough." "I wasn't trying to hurt you," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "No," I replied, standing and gathering a few of the empty boxes. "You were just trying to gain sympathy. A little validation. Paint me as the problem so people would pat you on the back for putting up with me." I carried the containers to the trash, my back to her. The intention may have been different. But the result? The same. I started loading dishes into the dishwasher, each plate clinking softly against the rack. Day 4, Revelation. Being labeled inadequate by your wife hurts. But realizing she's been outsourcing her dissatisfaction to mutual acquaintances? That's worse. Emily was quiet behind me, arms crossed, defensive but unsure. "I was just frustrated," she said finally. "And instead of coming to me with that frustration, you went to people who barely know us. You turned it into gossip. You turned me into a story." I closed the dishwasher door and turned around to face her directly. Day 4, Conclusion. Respect isn't something you get to demand while refusing to give it. And today you showed me, again, just how little you have left for me. I began walking toward the stairs. "There's still 5 days left," I said over my shoulder. "Make them count." She followed a few steps, her voice softer now. "Mark, I never meant to hurt you. Please, can we just talk?" I paused, hand on the railing. "I'm still the woman who loves you," she added, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't turn around. I just kept walking. I folded the note and slid it into my pocket. Funny really, how fast 9 days to prove your worth turned into "please let's just talk." Day 5, The Unraveling. That morning, Emily was waiting for me at the kitchen table. Fresh coffee, clean mug, that nervous energy that comes when someone's been practicing what they're about to say in the mirror all night. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," she began cautiously. "Oh, have you?" I asked, taking a sip of the coffee she handed me. I didn't thank her. I wanted to hear what she had rehearsed so carefully. I realize now. I didn't handle things well. I let my anger speak for me. "Interesting," I said, setting my cup down. "You're just now realizing that calling your husband boring and inadequate in public might be a bad look? That maybe dragging his name through the mud reflects poorly on you too?" She winced. The words hit hard. I could tell. "I was angry," she said quietly, almost like she was trying to convince herself more than me. "And when you're angry," I said, leaning back in my chair, "your response is what? Public humiliation? Private demands? You lash out, paint me as the villain, then expect me to jump through hoops to prove I'm still worthy of you? That's not how it was." "No." I raised an eyebrow. "Let's see. You slowly cut me off from friends who might have helped me see this for what it was. You chipped away at my confidence with criticism disguised as constructive feedback. And then you fed those same complaints to anyone who'd listen. That's not a lapse in judgment, Emily. That's a pattern. I didn't mean to. I wasn't trying to manipulate you," she said, her voice starting to falter. "But you did," I said, voice quiet but firm. "And now that I've stopped playing along, suddenly it's not my issues, it's our issues." She was silent for a long moment. Finally she said, "I can see now that I've contributed to the problems." "Contributed?" I repeated, scoffing slightly. "Emily, you built most of this mess. I just didn't notice because I was too busy cleaning up after your emotions. I finished my coffee and pushed the chair back, standing up. Day 5 observation? I said as I carried my mug to the sink. When manipulation stops working, manipulators always suggest counseling. It's the final card. One last effort to bring in a third party who might validate their version of the story. You're not even open to trying therapy? She asked, visibly frustrated now. I'm not saying no, I replied. I'll consider it. But I need to know what exactly we'd be discussing at that table. I thought, maybe we could have a quiet night together. Talk it through. Talk about what exactly? I asked, turning back to her. How sorry you are. Or how sorry you are that I finally saw through it. I saw her composure crack just a little, like a vase that's been dropped but hasn't shattered yet. Why can't you just accept that I'm apologizing and trying to move forward? She asked, desperation edging into her voice. Because this apology, I said, walking toward the doorway, feels less like remorse and more like strategy. And that's the difference between forgiveness and forgetting. I'll forgive what was real. But I won't forget what was calculated. You're not sorry that you hurt me, Emily, I said, voice steady. You're sorry that it didn't work out the way you planned. That's not true, she fired back, defensive but not convincing. Then prove it, I said, crossing my arms. Call Lisa's wife. Right now. Tell her you exaggerated. Tell her you painted a false picture of our marriage to make yourself look better. I didn't lie, she said quickly, shaking her head. So, just to be clear, you stand by what you said? That I'm boring? That I'm emotionally unavailable? That I'm not enough? She was silent, trapped between the truth and the shame of being caught. Her mouth opened but nothing came out. Finally she just stared at me, guilt written across her face. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice thin. I want you to understand, I said, taking a step closer. That respect in a marriage isn't optional. That loyalty means you defend your partner in public, not tear them down when they're not around to defend themselves. That love, real love, doesn't come with ultimatums or performance reviews. And public humiliation. I let that hang in the air for a beat before continuing. If you can truly grasp all of that, if you can live it, not just say it, then maybe we'll have something left worth fighting for. She sank down onto the couch, all the energy she'd spent trying to control the narrative seeming to drain from her. I feel like I don't even know how to fix this, she admitted. Then maybe, I said, you need to spend some time figuring out whether there's even a marriage left to save. I paused, then added quietly, and if it turns out there isn't, well then you'll get the ending you threatened me with back at the start of the week. Only difference is, it'll be my decision. Not yours. She went still at that. You could see it land. The power dynamic she tried to create had flipped completely. Her bluff had been called, and now she was the one waiting to be chosen, or not. I don't want us to end, she whispered. Then stop trying to control how we continue, I said, and turned to head upstairs. She sat there alone in the dining room, the so-called romantic dinner she had prepared sitting untouched. It was clearly another tactic, a peace offering wrapped in manipulation. But the gesture rang hollow now. Day 5, the truth lands. By now it was obvious. Emily hadn't wanted reconciliation, she'd wanted obedience. What she called love looked a lot more like conditional acceptance and quiet compliance. At work the next day I stayed focused. I spent the afternoon tying up loose ends, cleaning out emails, prepping in a way that told me I was nearing a turning point. Truth was, I'd made up my mind days ago. But I wanted her to sit with the silence she'd created, let her sweat through the timeline she'd set, now turned against her. That evening, I walked through the front door to find her already at the dining table, pages spread out in front of her. She looked up immediately. Her eyes were swollen, makeup barely clinging on. I wrote down everything I want to change, she said, voice trembling, about how I've been treating you. I glanced down at the papers but I didn't reach for them. 3 pages. Neatly written, bullet-pointed, full of promises and commitments. I glanced over them and nodded slowly. Impressive. She watched me, hopeful. I meant every word. I'm sure you did, I said. But that's the thing about words. They come easy after the damage is done. Her face tightened. Where was this version of you, I asked, tapping the pages lightly, when you were gossiping about me behind my back? Where was all this self-awareness when you chose to send a marriage ultimatum over text instead of sitting down like an adult and having a real conversation? I am different now, she said quickly. This week, it changed me. I looked at her for a long moment before responding. No, Emily. This week didn't change you. It revealed you. She flinched like I'd slapped her. The real question, I continued, is whether you're capable of actual change, or if you've just gotten better at making the right kind of promises. She stepped closer, eyes searching mine. Then test me, she whispered. Let me prove I can be better. I studied her face, wet with tears, voice trembling with urgency. But underneath all that emotion I still saw it. The calculation. That part of her that had spent years learning which words to say and when to say them to keep control. This wasn't a breakthrough. It was a tactic. You say you love me, I said. But I think what you really loved was the version of me who absorbed all your criticism, who regulated your emotions so you didn't have to, who let everything go unchecked just to keep the peace. That's not true, she insisted, her voice breaking. It's completely true, I replied, unwavering. The moment I stopped performing for you, you fell apart. The second I started holding up a mirror, evaluating you the way you evaluated me, you couldn't handle it. She was sobbing now, mascara running down her face. Please, please don't leave. The 9 days aren't over yet. They are for me, I said gently. Day 1 through 8 told me everything I needed to know. Day 9? That's just the day I act on it. She followed me as I walked toward the door. You're making a mistake, she choked out. No, I said as I opened it. The mistake was staying this long. But I appreciate your ultimatum, Emily. Really. It reminded me that I don't need to keep proving my worth to someone who never saw it in the first place. And with that, I stepped out, leaving her standing there in the doorway of a house that never truly felt like home. 3 months later. I was grabbing coffee at the local grocery store when I saw her. She looked smaller somehow, like the weight she used to throw around no longer served her. We made brief eye contact. She gave a hesitant smile. I nodded politely and walked on. The version of me that would have paused? That version didn't exist anymore. The woman who once gave me 9 days to prove my value ended up teaching me something priceless. I never had to beg for basic respect. I was always worth more than that. Some lessons come at a high cost, but once you learn them, you never forget. Dear listeners, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced something similar, where stepping away gave you back your clarity? Let's talk in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Until next time.